Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom-sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show.
It's good to see you, man.
Hey, it's good to see you, Eric. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. I love the topic. We always go back and forth. What are we going to talk about? And you bring up something that I felt like is related to trust. Say that, but I think there's more we can dive into this. It's just paramount on so many different fronts. So that's safety. And I was thinking about how, I don't remember who said it, but I remember coming across this quote that I think about, and it really has helped me. The men are afraid their primal fear is being made fun of. And again, men's primal fear is being made fun of. Women's primal fear is physical safety. Like the degree to which women have to think about their safety, we don't understand. Like it's considered, has really shown us, she considers every time she leaves the house and walks where she parks and how she navigates, and every person that comes across, like, it's always on her mind. It's not always on my mind. I'm thinking about it when I'm with her, but when I'm by myself, I'm not thinking about my physical safety. If I'm in my normal part of what I do day to day, it's not something that's on my mind. And the degree to which it's on her mind, and she's also someone that's had some issues. I think every woman's had issues in physical safety things where they've had something come across where it even reinforces that. And so I think as someone who leads, someone who's taking her into full consideration, someone who may have to consider that, I have to then think if she thinks in regard to her physical safety becoming a primary part of everything that I do. And it's not just when we're out in public. It's also home. It's also all the different activities. Any activity that I'm doing, she wants to know that her physical safety is considered. And I have a little example. One of the things that I think about is context is a really important part of this. She's really helped me to see how much context is regard to everything. But if we think about, let's say, for example, it can also be regarded when I'm doing things that are hygienic. That's also physical safety. So say, for example, that I'm filling up the car with gasoline. And when I'm done with that I wash my hands or at least put some of my hygiene. That's physical safety. That I'm considering my safety as a part of her safety. That I'm considering where she's at emotionally, her capacity. All of those things have to do with physical safety, her physical well-being, where she is in the given period in the month, considering that physical safety. So this idea of context, I think, is a really important part of this. And all of this is, I feel like, to allay her nervous system so that if she sees that I'm considering herself in all these different situations, her nervous system is calm. And then she's able to proceed throughout the rest of the day. If we're out doing something and she doesn't feel like I'm considering her safety and that puts her nervous system on edge, the rest of the night, she might be looking a little bit more alert, state of alert and bracing. She's not going to be in that space that's going to be inviting, that's going to be flow, that's going to be in that other type of space. And so this physical safety idea is very important in every aspect of what we do.
100%. And safety is such an important thing because, like you said, we don't as men really understand the amount of fear that most women are carrying throughout most of their life. And if we just understood that one little thing, I think men would understand women and be a lot more patient and compassionate with them. versus she's crazy, she's so emotional. If you were terrified every moment of every day, you wouldn't be the same as you are when you're not terrified every moment of every day. And this is something that we get to create, is to hold this space and to create this space of a place in her life where she can let that guard down, let that nervous system, the way that you pointed it out so beautifully, to let that nervous system relax. And this is where all of a sudden these Dom sub dynamics become these really beautiful places of exchange, because in my experience, I've at this point doing this coaching work for 4+ years, I've worked with hundreds of different women. And this is true across the board. It's a little different for every person. The specifics are a little different for every person. But it's true across the board, this fear. And it just gets to become such a beautiful thing that we get to create, because almost every woman that I've ever come across has never experienced the ability to just be okay. Now think about that. It's no wonder things like women can feel so activated and so on high alert and so controlling. They're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to create a space around them that is safe for them to exist in. But they're never generally able to accomplish that without stuffing themselves into a box and making their life extremely small.
Yeah. And I think what you just said too.
Hiding isn't safety, it's just hiding.
You said about controlling, I think that brings up Rachel jokes that can be very controlling, but it all goes back to safety. It all goes back to safety. Her controlling is often that comes up in her life and that I hear about is rooted in her desire to feel safe. And once I realized that, then all of a sudden I can hear all that, whatever her words are, her voice is, consider that and get better and better at considering her and her safety and allaying her nervous system. And I might need to do steps, take her into consideration with more regard with her safety than I might even think is necessary. But if it calms her nervous system and she feels more safe in that regard, it's worth my time. It's worth my energy to do that.
What we do is, over time, we start to build we use this word trust a lot on this podcast, but we start to build a trust that is much deeper than just basic trust. Like the trust where she feels safe more and more often. And this is something I've watched with Dawn over the years of working on this together, where now it's not like I have to convince her that she's safe, or I have to make sure that she knows that I'm like actively paying attention to this and that I actively care about it, where maybe I have to put on even more of a show of it than what would otherwise be necessary to really look after her. Because in reality, I don't need to plan that much for safety. I just need to be ready to act. And I need to be confident in my own ability to act if there's a physical safety issue. We can build this trust by continually showing up in this way, where now it's not like she's always maybe at an 8 ready to go to 10, but she can actually go through life at a 2.
Yeah. And one of the things that she has mentioned to me is, in public, I'm calm when there are high intense situations. And that's always been something from the beginning, that she felt safe because I don't escalate situations. Been a number of times where I've had people that have been, for reasons that were their own, not something that I did. I've had in cities or in countryside or whatever, people yelling or screaming or doing something, but I didn't escalate the situation. And I was able to navigate myself out of that situation and her out of that in a very safe way. And my nervous system was calm. And my priority in that was not my ego, was not me looking like the man. It was her safety, my safety, and moving on with the situation. And that's where you need to sometimes check your ego at the door, check yourself, make sure that when you're out in public, you're not out there being the hero. You're not out there being the man who's got to prove his point, but you're out there. Her safety is your priority. Your safety is, and your safety may be under threat. Don't do that unnecessarily. Like, you're not going to go and make it worse than it needs to be. And I think
Or-
that
Or put yourself in harm's way,
exactly,
which
be
which
smart.
could then take her
And then
her
she's
safety.
relying on that. She's trying to look after you. And we learned about
Yep.
that from sporting energy and myself there. But this goes with all regards. Then how do you drive? And not reacting, like really checking my nervous system where I'm not getting triggered. I'm not getting pissed. That's all. Why do women not like that when you do that? Because they don't feel safe. They feel like you're going to make a situation where someone might retaliate in a violent or whip that woman in safety, and your ego is more important than her safety. So I feel like this is a really important thing for us as men, that we need to be able to respond and not react, able to look at assess the situation and give the situation what it necessitates, not more than that.
This reminds me of a story from when I was taking some self-defense training years ago, and the guy teaching it was talking about like how he would react if some armed people broke in to a Best Buy while he was shopping there, and talking about the best self-defense is looking after yourself. And I would have no problem with a newspaper headline that said, "Self-defense instructor found cowering in cell phone case during Best Buy armed robbery." If the best way to defend myself is to hide or to run away, I'm going to do that. I don't always have to fight back. Like, sometimes the best defense is just to walk away. And I love that, because when we think about this in terms of relationships and of being able to make a submissive woman feel safe to let go in us and with us and around us, we sometimes need to just take her and go somewhere else.
Exactly. She needs to feel like she's the priority.
Right.
She needs to feel like her safety is the priority. Your mission is her. Like the movie Transporter, and his job is to take that kid and transport it. Like, your job is her. You started here and you went there. When you're out in public, your focus is on her. The other thing about it for myself that I'm also had to realize is how I drive. I've had to learn to drive in a manner that allows her to feel more safe. I can be a little aggressive in my driving. Unnecessary. Make it smooth. Be cool, boy. Drive in a manner where her safety is considered. I drive differently with her in the car than when I'm on my own. I still feel like I'm safe when I'm on my own, but it's different. It's a different equilibrium calibration that we need to take into consideration.
Yeah. And I think all of this kind of zoomed out a little bit too. It's important for us to recognize that the fear, like safety is really looking to transcend or escape fear. Right? So all searching for safety is a searching for freedom from fear. And this need for safety and the fear that most women walk around in, it's not just physical safety. It's not just fear of physical harm or injury. It's also fear of emotional pain. These emotional pains are sometimes worse than the physical or the threat of physical ones, because they can hurt all the time. And there's so much pain that is like just being carried around on a moment-to-moment basis. And this is where triggers come from, by the way, is this stored pain that we're walking around with. And then we're just afraid all the time. And women especially, the fear of emotional pain feels very much like a fear for physical safety.
Right.
So this is one of the really important things I think men miss, is that there are two relationships happening between you and your woman at any given moment. There's a physical relationship and there's an emotional relationship. And both of those are happening simultaneously. And if we don't tend to both of those with care and value safety and protection and be able to provide on both of those levels at the same time, then we're going to get a woman who is in fear.
When she's in fear, she closes. And when she closes, she literally closes her legs, closes her heart, places that we want to be able to receive and penetrate. I also feel like the other part of this is if she doesn't feel comfortable with me outside of the bedroom and feeling safe, then it limits her feeling of what's possible in the bedroom. And especially when you like to play in an area, which we do, where there's some physical, where fear is a part of that journey. The range, what's possible in the bedroom, is dictated by her feeling of safety outside of the bedroom. They're related. She's looking here to feel safe here and sees that these are transferable skills.
This is a really good place to put some specificity to language that I think I've always disliked some of these terms, but when they really make sense in the context, in the right context, then you can start to understand why this language gets used. And that's the language of the container of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about this, the relationship is I'm going to use some physical, practical analogies. Like the relationship is a bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole bowl needs to be a place where she's safe. Everywhere inside of that like one of those big, gigantic popcorn bowls or something, right? Everywhere inside of there needs to be a safe place for her. Mm-hmm. So then when you take some maybe fear play in the bedroom, or there's all of these little different scenarios that happen even in going maybe into places or cities where she feels less safe. If it's happening inside of a life where a container where everything is safe and looked after and taken care of, then the smaller moments are held within the bigger context of the container of the relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And if you feel safer over here, there's more capacity it's like investing, like you're investing in her safety over here. You get to be able to benefit from that investment over here. And as going back to your bowl analogy, if you're chipping away at her safety over here, she's not going to want to threaten that safety over here in the bedroom. So it's to your advantage to make her feel safe as possible here. But if you like to play in areas that play with fear, play with safety.
All right. And that way you go into the scenario with a relaxed nervous system, with a sense of trust, of her knowing that you've got her, that everything, that you're there, and you come out of it with aftercare on the backside, reestablishing that safety and trust. And then there's a smaller container of that experience that's held within itself. But all of that is still within the bigger context of her knowing that you've got her.
It makes me think about when I read about trauma, it's not the event that causes the trauma, it's the lack of aftercare that causes the trauma. Mm-hmm. That if you have a really traumatic situation, but there's someone there right afterwards that's there for you and holds you, it really decreases the traumatic thing. And I saw that again and again when I was in situations in other cultures where there was a real support system and they didn't have the built-in trauma that was there. But when you experience these things in isolation, it causes trauma. So it may be confusing for us guys. In one context, she's scared and doesn't like it. It's because there's no aftercare. There's no container for that. But you take that same sort of activity and put it over here where there's a container. She wants to be afraid and she wants to have the aftercare. Like why going to a scary movie or going to a roller coaster or going extreme sport or something can be really exhilarating and fun. It's because there's a container and there's especially if you do it with someone else, creates a bonding effect.
Yeah, it's got a beginning, it's got an end.
And then when she gets afraid, and then you're there to be with her and comfort her, you now associate you as a space of safety. And that when your life is really up in the air and you're not providing a container, there's a lot less opportunity for that over here. And I've seen that with my injury recently. It's really created a situation where I chipped away at the bull, because in me not taking care of myself and being in a way that was to upset that container of safety, it's really affected us in other areas of our life, and everything's had to be turned down. And that's right. There's an impact to the actions. And I think that's really important.
So, you mentioned at the beginning some of the ways that you go about creating safety. And I want to eventually get to talking about why we create this safety, because it's not just for its own sake. I want to talk a little bit more about what it makes possible, but a couple of other ways to create that safety. You mentioned looking after yourself, taking care of yourself, letting her know that you're going to be there for her in the long term.
Communication is also important.
Yes.
Communicating what's happening, what you're
Communication
doing.
with clarity.
When communication, clarity, I don't mean bad communication, good communication.
Yeah. And that's a really important thing too, is communication in a way that creates safety is being very clear and specific about what you are saying, why you're saying it, what it means, so that there's not ambiguity, because ambiguity feels unsafe. It's uncertain.
Correct.
It's unknown.
When you really true, that clarity is its own reward. She needs to feel that you are leading and that there's clarity and there's a direction. You have a captain of a ship. It's not really now in the storm, and you don't feel very safe. Captain, this is coming from this direction. We're going to go this way. We're going to go backwards and come around. Knows what we're doing. Same situation. I see something. We're going to take a left here. Then we're going to go right. Just the mind. Change the plans for your safety. All clear, all good. And I think another thing that I wanted to say to you before, I love where you're going, but I didn't want to lose sight of this. Our own work on ourselves and our nervous system is so paramount on this. If we're feeling scared, she feels scared. And that is even true. Like, we could be at home and there's nothing afraid out there, and I'm just scared. All of a sudden she gets like, it impacts her. So our work is on ourselves, on our therapy, the inner work, the nervous system work, the holding of that, really doing it. Because a lot of times, guys, you stuff all that down, women can sense it. And when we get defensive, when we're proving, we're overly explanatory, all of these things, he's afraid. There's fear there.
Yeah. Like, what she senses is we're protecting something, and we are protecting something. Like, we stuffed something down because we weren't comfortable with it. And that's in us. We stuffed it, so it's in us, and we're walking around with it every day. And
Right.
that's the thing that we can't always see in ourselves, because sometimes we stuff it so far down that we don't even know it's there or remember it's there, or certainly don't think it would be it's definitely not affecting me. It's definitely not, certainly not causing any problems at all, that I just ignored my entire emotional existence for 40 fucking years. Like, that couldn't be causing any problems, right? But she senses that, because the reason we didn't confront it is because it sucks. It's terrifying. It's scary. It's like, it makes us be with our pain, and we don't want to be with our pain. So we stuff it, and then we get to be with our pain constantly all the time. And that's what she feels. So when we have those moments where, like you said, when you're scared shows up as having a temper. Scared shows up as being uncertain and unclear in our communication and wishy-washy. Scared shows up in a lot of ways. And we think she's being like picky or judgmental or whatever, but really she's just sensing the thing that we don't want to look at and she knows is there.
And if we're getting afraid of her, that's also a problem. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
there's a feminine, oh, you're afraid of me? That becomes another point that's worth bringing up. That part of the safety is not being afraid of your woman and her voice and her truth, and not letting that, of course, it might affect you, but not letting that take you down.
And the number one way that we show her that we're afraid of her is by getting defensive. When she says something and we're like, that's not what I meant, or why don't you, like, as soon as you get into that defensive mode, you are showing her that you're afraid of her, which means there's no part of her that can trust you or feel safe with you whatsoever.
It's true. It's true. And I can, as I'm being defensive, like literally as the word comes out, the frequency comes out, now I'm like, and I'll literally be like, oh, no, I know. I'll just name it.
Own it right away.
Right away. Because that was the problem of mine. I realize that I'm still breaking it. Occasionally I get defensive, but it's amazing what it will do. Like you just said, if you name it, and she's aware that you're being conscious and you're being defensive. And that's what she needs you to know.
That's what she's trying to point out when when it feels like, when guys think a woman is overreacting, what she's really doing is being very uncomfortable with our own inner bullshit and mental gymnastics that we're doing to convince ourselves that nothing's wrong.
Correct.
And she doesn't feel okay with that.
Yep. I wanted to go back. You brought up, I don't know if we fully digested. I was curious about when you brought up about the why of safety. It almost seems obvious, but I know that there are other layers to this. And you mentioned the physical safety and the emotional safety, but even behind that, like, why is this important? What's behind that for you when you're thinking about?
Well, a lot of this comes back to ego. The difference between authenticity, or who we really are, and ego, who we think we are. I heard it said this way by a guy named Peter Crone. He said, if it's not life-threatening, it's just ego-threatening. And when you put it in that context, you realize almost nothing is actually threatening to the real part of us. What it's threatening to is the parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable because it's a belief system that's getting confronted.
Right.
So part of why we do this, and a part of why we do this for ourselves first, is so that we can do it for her. It's that we have to be able to lead her from a place of strength. If we haven't done our work, then us trying to lead her is just not even possible. We have to be safe in our own systems in order to create true safety for her system. But we're talking about safety on a level of existence, not just safety on a physical level, and not just safety from being triggered, not just avoiding the fear or trying to walk around it. But what this kind of work really makes possible over the long term, when you continue to look underneath it, why is this making you afraid? How, and to look at it myself, like, how can I create this space in this relationship where she doesn't have to be afraid? Not just that I avoid it well so she doesn't feel it, but to actually vanquish it, to overcome and heal that which causes the pain in the first place.
Wow. When she gets there, it's a whole other level. It's a whole other game. Then you can start playing with the fear on your own terms, in your own ways.
Yes, but you can also experience a woman who's not afraid, who's actually just present in the moment, because fear will always take you out of the moment, right? Fear will always take you into the head. It'll take you into closure. It does that for every human being. It just happens a lot more for women because the world is a more dangerous place for them, and both on a physical and an emotional level, in part because men have made it, which is an unfortunate reality, but something that this approach we're talking about here is really there to heal. But what doing this work does, sure, you could play with fear more, but you could also maybe just experience what it's like to actually witness a woman who feels free.
Oh.
The amount of what I experience in Dawn, like the amount of love and energy and passion and desire and like life just fucking pulses in this woman's body and aura and existence in every moment, because she's able to operate from a place of this existential kind of safety. Like, she's not just okay physically, she's not just okay mentally, but she's okay to be herself, like, all the way. And that just sets her free.
Yes. Yes. 'Cause that's another part of this. When you said be yourself, and the amount of just allowing her, it's her voice, it's her desires, it's her cravings, it's her wants, it's her even expressing her fear. Like, even her being able to, as Rachel can even speak about her fear, that eases her fear. If you can hold her fear, let her be afraid. It's safer for her when she can feel her fear openly, and I'm not impacted, or it doesn't increase my fear. I can hold that for any kind of reason.
A lot of people, and this was a big aha for me when I realized this one, was for a long time I went through this thinking that fear was an emotion. And the closer that I looked at it, I realized fear isn't really an emotion. It's a reaction. Like, it's a protection mechanism. It's a feeling, like, it feels like a feeling because it's arising in the body. Like, there's tension with it, there's shortness of breath, there's all of the markers of an emotion in the way that it impacts the body. But it's not exactly an emotion if it only exists as a reaction to something that isn't happening. Like,
It's true.
I think fear is an emotion when our life is being threatened. But I think fear is a protection mechanism otherwise. And that actually, that shift in perspective lets you see it differently, where it's not, oh, I have to just let her be afraid, because we do need to be able to accept her emotions. We do have to allow her to be afraid, but we can see it. What is it that she's trying to protect? What is she afraid of? And why is she afraid of that? And how can I help make that feel safe for her so she doesn't have to be afraid?
And that's something, it doesn't have to be a resting place forever and ever. It can be something that you hear about and it moves through, and it's, and said, and I also think about exposure therapy too. The notion that we could get exposed to these things, and then she can feel safe in them, and then the fear can dissipate. And that fear becomes an opportunity to, hey, maybe we need to lean into that and hold that. And that's also part of feeling safe, is that depending just enough, it's dosage. It's a lot of life is dosage. Like, how much are you going to push? Is it this much or just a little bit, or where? And that's why her expression in that is necessary. And considering her fear, you might be able to feel like, I was just with Rachel and we were at the ocean, and she's very scared of the ocean, and my injury exacerbated that. And she didn't even want to go back into the water. Like, she's literally petrified. It was just ironic, 'cause she's like an incredible swimmer. And I just put her in a little bit. And then I said, okay, is that good? And then a little bit more. And all of which was really safe, but I was honoring her and where she was at, and yet still pushing her and holding her. So she felt safe. And then we were able to go back and do it again. But that safety is often, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about context and nervous system. Her nervous system is the primary part of context. If we're not tapped into where she's at in her nervous system and become an expert at reading that and feeling that, we're not getting the full contextual picture of the situation, because we might be, what's the big deal? But she might be really scared of something. And some of it might be absurd, like a spider or something that's not a real spider that's dangerous. It could just be like out of the blue. But we need to honor that, at the same time, push that. And then I say push it, like you said, we don't need to like be there. We can lead her into a new place.
Yeah. Can we talk about spiders for a second?
Yes. You lit up when you said spider. Scared of spiders, Andrew?
No, I'm not scared of spiders at all. I will gladly avoid big, gigantic, hairy spiders. I don't have an affinity for them, but I don't have a fear of them. But this is a great example of the kind of fear that a lot of women walk around with. Dawn sees a little spider, or in Minnesota where we live, there are no like venomous snakes. None of the snakes we have here will hurt you. They're just basically big worms. But if she sees a 4-inch long snake on a bike trail or a tiny little spider, like, she will scream. And like, there's a part of her that's terrified of that. And sure, I could help. I guess I probably could help her be less afraid of those, but she also she can lean into me. If there's a spider, I kill the spider for her. If there's a snake.
No, we get to be the hero. It feels good. Like, it happened today. Actually, there was a spider. She was wasn't a spider. It was some other bug, but it doesn't matter. All bugs freak Rachel out. All bugs. And I don't have any problem. I'm like, boom, got it.
I will say though, the bigger or hairier the bug, the more likely I am to grab a paper towel to pick it up with.
Oh, yeah. On this one, it was like a hairy bee, I think is what it was.
No.
But I went for it. Went for the paper towel. No. Yeah, I don't think I ever thought about safety much until being with Rachel and being in a situation like this. And I think it wasn't until I was in this kind of relationship with this kind of dynamic that I realized the safety was the first consideration that I needed to consider, especially when I was out in public, that if she's going to be there fully with me, fully devoted to me, looking at me, seeing to me, thinking about me, the kind of devotion that I'm desiring, that safety has to be the number one first consideration. And I realized how many times in previous relationships and previous times I wasn't considering that. And that was also part of why the night was the night that it was. And that, like, it could go either way, and you couldn't necessarily control or dictate it. There's a lot more capacity to dictate and control your evening when you're taking responsibility for the entire evening, for the entire context of the evening, and you're considering all of it. And this is why, considering how much you drink, considering if you're going to take an Uber, maybe you had an extra drink, take the Uber. I know you can drive, but take the Uber.
Yeah, because if you end up like Justin Timberlake in jail because he got a DUI, now you're not there to look after her. Now she has to figure out how to deal with your problems, and now your problems are going to impact her life when she didn't do a damn thing. But now, because you did, because you thought you were okay when you really weren't, or you were borderline and you didn't really know, you really fuck up her life and her ability to trust you. And this is why the trust and safety things go hand in hand, because we are I think it was episode 9 where we were talking about being trustworthy.
Right.
Being trustworthy is a part of helping her feel safe. And why do we want her to feel safe? Because we're talking about dominant submissive dynamics here. In our case, like 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I am asking this woman to let go of control of her life and follow me. And how the fuck can she do that if she doesn't even feel safe to be around me? She doesn't feel safe in her body, in her existence. Like, this is, to your point, it's not even number one. It's not even number one on the list. It's the piece of paper the list is written on.
He's got money in the bank. They're going to have a lock on the door. Like, it's literally called a safe. You know what I mean? That's the way it is with her. That's what I love about what you said. We have to talk about the obvious stuff, but you have to prioritize, because most guys don't think about safety. So we have to think about that. All of a sudden, every situation, we have to be considering safety as primary.
that's what we do. We get into these dom-sub relationships and we think, I've got a woman who wants to do whatever I tell her to do. And we start thinking about the things we can do to her and the things we can get from her. And we don't pause long enough to think, how can I make this actually feel good for both of us? And sure, at the beginning, you're going to probably play in some of that energy of the give and take when safety is less of a concern because everything's brand new. But if you want to make this work over any period of time, with a leader and follower dynamic in a relationship, especially if you're doing this in some kind of a 24/7 type of a situation, you can't expect her to keep showing up and wanting to do everything that you are asking of her, to follow you, to obey you, to push the edges that you want to push with her, to engage in inks that can sometimes be pushing the edge of her emotional or physical safety. Like,
Yeah, we haven't even really talked about that much, but that goes unsaid. We're talking about the context, the 24/7, everything that's outside of the kinks, outside of edge play, any sort of physical, obvious thing where the safety has to be considered, where you have to know your craft. But everything else matters. And that's what you hammer home again and again. All of it matters. And the boring stuff really matters.
the boring stuff matters the most because it's what makes up 98% of life. People think, oh, she's not being submissive in the bedroom. She's not doing the things she used to do, or like she's not submitting to me in the way that I want her to submit to me. Okay, we got to zoom out a little bit. What are you doing with the other 23 and a half hours of your day? Are you getting it's not like these things, it's not like we live these two separate lives where ink and sex and sexuality and BDSM play and whatever are over here, and then the rest of how you live your life doesn't matter.
Yep. If everything out, then that gets
100%, all the way back to the most fundamental, foundational thing of our human bodies, which is sleep. We can't do any of this shit if we aren't getting a good night's sleep, if we're not well rested. We can't be emotionally regulated. We can't be physically healthy. We're not going to be our best on any level as a man if we're not getting a good night's sleep. So you think about this, like how much that impacts you. If you are running on 4 hours of sleep for a few nights and you're short, you're not focused, you're just feeling like crap, maybe you're overdosing on caffeine to get yourself through the day, that's the man that is showing up for her in her life. She's getting a man who is emotionally reactive, who's not present, who's tired, who's like strung out on some sort of stimulant to keep himself awake. And then if you're like, all right, get on your knees for me, she's like, the fuck? Why? For who? For what shred of humanity that you're bringing to me am I going to get on my knees?
And that brings me exactly what you said. And I think when men feel like you're entitled to it, or that she owes it to you, where it becomes, where guys get this thing in their head, they're like, oh, I want a sub because that way I get to do whatever I want. No, it's the opposite. You have to get a sub. So now everything that you do matters, and she matters. Otherwise, your sub's going to not last, and it's not going to go as well. And so when you start considering and taking responsibility for all of it, then she's there to surrender to all of you.
Yeah, and I think the number of men who would really want to pursue being a dom, if they understood the amount of responsibility that it required, that it wasn't an escape from responsibility, but it was it makes your sense of responsibility a complete necessity in every part of your life. The number of men who would want to do this and play this role in a relationship would decrease probably by 95% if they really understood how much it requires of you. But holy shit, for me, there's been no higher calling to become my best because I want this relationship. I want this devotion from her. I want this surrender. I want to feel her. I want to see her and experience her as being free from all of the mind fucks that she's put herself through, free from all of this fear, free from all of the ways that she is on hyper alert and trying to manage life, and just able to be in her joy. Like, I want that. I want to experience, I want to feel her feeling that. I want to experience her feeling that. And the only way I can do that is to make it possible for her by leading her into a better life for herself, which means I need to lead myself into a better life for myself, which is why this relationship for me has been the catalyst that has made me into the best version of myself that I can picture myself being. And I'm really damn proud of myself for that.
It galvanizes you, like it motivates you. The work matters. The inner work matters. The outer work matters. There's a reason for it. And immediate feedback, there's a response that you're like, oh, fuck, it's working, or it's not working. And when it's not working, wow, it's more painful, but that pain motivates you to improve. I've seen that happen recently. I've had this injury. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm not fully there. I've had to get support. She's stressed. It's an impact her in a big way. Part of my journey, though, is to recognize I can't always be there for her as much. She might need to go reach out to other people. One of those people she reached out to was you. I really appreciate that, man. She came to you needing some support, and you were there for her in the time when I couldn't be there as much for her. And I feel like that's another part of like us. Can we check our ego at the door and be like, hey, there's other people that can support you and provide a frame or a masculine presence or something at times when it's necessary. And I think that's another part of this too, is checking our egos.
Yeah. We talked about this in one of our last episodes about how much like our hearts need to be open and receptive to her. And we really, like, she needs that from us, but we need it too.
Mhm.
And this is, for me, one of the biggest benefits of doing all this safety work. Yeah, you know what? Every sexual thing that you could possibly want is made possible by making her feel safe enough to let go of control and to know that she's going to be taken care of by you.
The most important thing you could learn.
Yep.
I mean, think about this. I've been doing EMDR and this therapy work. The first part of it is to create a container of safety. And once that safety is there, then our nervous system and our trauma and all that shit can be processed and digested in this work. Same thing in the bedroom. If you feel safe and you got some amount of connection and you've got leadership and she's committed, you can go all kinds of places.
Yeah. And it requires that we're able to help her stay open, to create a life where she can live,
Correct.
where she can live as being open.
Correct.
And like all of that, and this is, I think, one of the points I want to make here is we don't just do this for her. We don't just create safety for her.
Mhm.
We create safety for her because it sets her free to be more for us.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
But if we haven't done this work for ourselves and opened up our hearts, we can do all the creating of safety we want for her, and we won't be able to receive the love that comes back to us for having done it.
Well said. I feel like I'm feeling that myself, that I'm just starting to receive a lot more, just getting my heart cracked open, realizing how much I wasn't receiving. Well said.
So the last point I want to make on this, and I'd love to hear your reflections on this, is looking at this topic or concept of safety from the perspective of abundance versus the perspective of lack and scarcity. Because if we approach safety as, I think I mentioned a little while ago, avoiding fear, what we do over time, and if you picture a life and you like project a life out over 40 years, 50 years, like from today forward, if you just continued to avoid everything that made you uncomfortable, your life would just shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. But if you continue to confront the things that make us uncomfortable, if we continue to overcome and challenge those things, and we set ourselves more and more free, now instead of our life shrinking as we get older, our life gets to be more abundant, more expansive. And so this is why I think it's important that we look at safety not from avoiding fear, but from confronting fear, not just because of what it does in the short term, but how you project that over a life, in being able to live an expansive, joy-filled, abundant life as we get older, as we age together.
Yeah. And I think it goes to the heart of the whole dynamic. She's going to surrender to you. There's a fear there. The more that you could create safety, the more she can surrender. It's the equation. And then the more she surrenders, the more abundant your life feels. So the abundance, safety equals that. What you're saying is to really clarify there, you got to edge is an important part of that. That's how you expand. So you lean into the things that make you feel uncomfortable, the things that you feel that are push that edge. This also goes back to what I was saying about exposure therapy as well. So you got to expose yourself. That's the way through.
Yeah. And what makes us most uncomfortable as men? Usually it's feeling worthy of leading and taking charge of another person's life. And it's all of her emotions and feelings. Those are the places where like most of our work is in becoming comfortable with those two things and however they show up and play out in our lives. But if you look at most people and how most people go through their lives and most unconscious relationships that aren't playing in the realm of awareness like we are, this is where you see people as they age and get into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they have nothing left to talk about but their health problems and the weather. Because they've built this ego so strong over so much of their life by continuing to avoid their pain and avoiding their discomfort, and their life just shrinks. And that I don't want to be a person who gets old and becomes bitter and resentful and be filled with regrets. I want to be somebody who ages with wisdom and with energy. Like I want to feel alive even when I'm dying.
And that's only through doing hard shit and exposing ourselves, facing our fears, and leaning into, and a lot of things that we're afraid of are the things we want, our desires. Sharing that with her, bringing that forward, her bringing that forward, calibrating all these, bringing these all together. This is all part of it. Like you don't play it safe there. You need to be safe, but the way to be safe is by leaning just enough unsafe, like just enough tweaking. It's if you play your recipe safe, you don't have that life force. So there needs to be this thing that just knows just enough to create that little place. That's how growth can happen. And that's where I like an important nuance in this.
Yeah. And recognizing this, if it's not life-threatening, it's just ego-threatening. So most of the fear is actually safe to confront because it's not going to kill us.
Right.
It's actually going to make us not afraid anymore if we can overcome that fear. But we have to be willing to confront it. We have to be willing to expose ourselves to it. We have to be willing to look underneath it and see why it's there. But that, like, when I talk about fear not being an emotion, it's like, it's covering up for some other emotion. Like it's what's underneath the fear. It's not the fear itself. It's what am I actually afraid of and why am I afraid of it? And how can I not be afraid of that? That's why I talk about fear not being an emotion. There's actually something underneath it. That's the real emotion that we need to look at and get to. Because again, it's just threatening some part of our ego, my belief systems, her set of pain avoidance techniques and coping mechanisms that have been built for damn good reason. Like the ego, we build our egos for a damn good reason. They're meant to try to protect us. They just do a really shitty job of it. And those audacious motherfuckers will do anything to continue to prove to themselves and to us that they're right, including fucking up our entire life in the process.
Yeah. And if ego and shame are really linked in many ways, ego's there protecting the parts of us that we're ashamed of. And so the ego, the fear and the ego, by facing your fears, you're also facing your shame often.
Can't think of a better mic drop to end on than that one. Really good conversation today, Eric. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.